Foreign Relations, Judiciary, and Appropriations Committees. Senator, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf. Great to be with you.
Well, let me get your reaction to this headline coming out today. A senior administration official saying the president now believes that the nation is in a position where it can pass comprehensive immigration legislation with a need to have a softening on both sides. Are you ready to compromise on this issue with the president and pass bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform?
Well, Wolf, I think Donald Trump has proven that he knows how to campaign, but it's not yet clear if he knows how to govern. If he lays out an optimistic, bold speech tonight in which he is willing to compromise on some key issues, immigration being one of them, I think we might begin to make progress here. But he would have to be willing to compromise on some of the very hard-edged positions he took in the course of the campaign. 10 senators were invited to the White House 2 weeks ago for a lunchtime meeting with the president. I was a participant in that lunch, and this exact issue was discussed, whether or not it's possible to bridge the very big divide between Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric, which was very anti-immigrant, and the bipartisan bill that 68 of us worked so hard to hammer out here in the Senate in the last Congress. I remain hopeful. I think we have to remain willing to hear the details, but it would require a big shift from the president's campaign rhetoric for us to be able to come to some bipartisan compromise.
Well, let me tell you what a group of journalists were told today about what the president is thinking, that this is a time for a comprehensive immigration bill. If there can be softening on both sides, would it lead to a pathway to citizenship? Not necessarily, the official says, but it could result in legal status for millions of undocumented immigrants. They'd be able to have jobs. They'd be able to have work. They'd pay taxes. They wouldn't have to worry about being deported. And dreamers, those children of undocumented immigrants who've grown up here in the United States, they would be just fine. They wouldn't have to worry at all, and potentially they could have a pathway to citizenship. That sounds like he's moving, from your standpoint, in the right direction.
Well, if that does sound like a significant move from the very hardline positions that were taken by Jeff Sessions, the now Attorney General, and by Donald Trump as he campaigned for president. I actually met this past week with a group of dreamers in Delaware. They're very successful students in college. A number of them have served in the United States military. These are folks who were brought to this country when they were young children, haven't known any country other than the United States, and really want to be a contributing, positive part of our society. That Donald Trump would be willing to say they would have a path to citizenship is certainly a step in the right direction.
The dreamers would. The others would have a path to legal status in the United States, and they wouldn't have to worry about being deported. Let's talk about another sensitive issue. Right now, there are a lot of these reports out there that the White House has reached out to the chairs of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. Do you think these respective Republican chairmen can do a fair bipartisan investigation into these allegations of inappropriate contacts between Trump campaign officials and Russian officials?
Well, Wolf, I'm gravely concerned that the White House is not respecting the boundaries for an investigation. We need to watch closely whether or not the FBI is given the free range to conduct this investigation fully and thoroughly, and whether or not the intelligence committees in the Senate and the House are facing inappropriate interference from the White House. I remain optimistic that here in the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats on the Intelligence Committee will follow the evidence where it leads. But this recent episode where the White House Chief of Staff was pushing Republican members of the House and Senate to make statements downplaying the seriousness of Russia's attack on our democracy and the seriousness of allegations of potential collusion, cooperation between senior members of the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence officials. That's a very troubling development, Wolf.
Well, do you believe these Republican chairmen should be replaced?
Well, the reality is they're not going to be replaced. If they don't change direction and step up to the plate here and actually follow this investigation thoroughly, then that's going to lead to a greater drumbeat for there to be an independent commission.
Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California says he thinks a special prosecutor is needed to investigate these allegations involving Russia. He said the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, shouldn't be involved, should recuse himself. Do you believe a special prosecutor is needed?
It will be needed if the Intelligence Committee isn't able to do its work. And I agree with Congressman Issa that the Attorney General, who was a very central player in the Trump campaign, should not be involved in making a decision about who to appoint as special prosecutor or how an independent commission might investigate the allegations of very senior collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence.
The new Pentagon plan involving ISIS to destroy ISIS reportedly lays out a specific plan to do so within 10 months to destroy ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Is that realistic?
Well, we had a hearing earlier today on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about what to do in Mosul after ISIS is driven out of Mosul. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the details of the new strategy for defeating ISIS. But we have to recognize first that Donald Trump inherited a coalition and a plan from President Obama that was already making real progress. The whole eastern half of Mosul has already been retaken from ISIS. But the proposals that I'm hearing are in the works to significantly cut funding to the State Department and to USAID are very ill-advised exactly at this time, because in order to defeat ISIS, we need to not just defeat them on the battlefield, we need to then be able to hold the territory formerly held by ISIS and strengthen governance. That requires diplomats and development professionals. And I think President Trump, if he proposes tonight, as is rumored, a significant cut to funding for the State Department and USAID, that proposal will be dead on arrival here in the Senate.
We're going to pick up that. We have a lot more to discuss. Senator, stand by. We'll continue our conversation right after this very quick break. We'll bring you, of course, live right here on CNN. We're back with Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator, sources are telling CNN that President Trump does indeed intend to discuss these threats to Jewish community centers, Jewish cemeteries across the country. I know that some Jewish community centers in your home state of Delaware have been threatened. More than 100 nationwide have now been threatened, these bomb threats. Do you have any sense who's behind these threats?
I don't have any sense who's behind it, but we know that they are anti-Semites. They know that anyone who would take on these hateful actions of threatening Jewish community centers, where children and seniors gather every day for education, nutrition, community, and folks who would engage in these hateful acts of desecrating Jewish cemeteries, are the sorts of people who deserve the president to speak out early and strongly and pointedly. President Trump shouldn't have to have been called upon to make these statements. He should speak out strongly against the rise of anti-Semitism here in the United States and in Europe, something that's been very troubling and needs real leadership from the President of the United States to push back against.
President Trump said today that in terms of messaging, he'd give himself a C or a C+, but in terms of achievements so far since becoming president, he'd give himself an A. What grade would you give the president so far?
Well, clearly President Trump is grading on a curve if he would give himself an A for actual accomplishments. He has signed a whole series of executive orders, but they've had relatively little effect. He has not gotten his cabinet through smoothly, and he is governing in a different way than he campaigned. I'll remind you, Wolf, that he campaigned on draining the swamp, but instead he's nominated a series of billionaires and bankers and insiders and lobbyists, and so he has struggled to get his cabinet officials confirmed. He's already had to fire his national security advisor for being untruthful and for having inappropriate contacts with the Russian ambassador. And he has struggled to articulate any clarity in terms of his vision for tax reform, for investing in the middle class and infrastructure, and for the so-called repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act. So at the same time, in the Obama administration, a number of bills had already been signed into law. Significant investments in infrastructure and in strengthening the economy had already happened, and the cabinet was already fully confirmed. There are lots of vacant senior positions in important federal agencies where the White House hasn't even nominated someone yet. So I frankly would not give him an A for governing so far.
What grade would you give him?
I'd certainly give him a B to a B- on governing and a C to a D on communicating.
What would you be listening for specifically tonight in the president's address? Is there anything that you believe he could say that we really might change the momentum out there, appeal to Democrats?
Well, I think if he returned to focusing on the middle class, if he laid out a real agenda for what he might do with us to strengthen manufacturing, to rebuild our roads and bridges and tunnels, to strengthen education, and to step back from some of his more extreme proposals. The travel ban, for example, did not play out well for him, was not, I think, successful. His so-called Muslim ban, which has been opposed in the courts, his constant fighting with journalists. I think if he stops attacking those who oppose him and instead refocuses on rebuilding the middle class in ways that would make us safer and stronger, then he's got a real prospect of successfully governing.
Senator Coons, thanks very much for joining us. I must say, a B, that's a pretty good grade. Not too bad coming from you, coming from a good, solid Democrat. I think he'll take that B from you anytime. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Coming up, we're getting new details about what President Trump likely will speak about in tonight's address before Congress. Also, we have new information from investigators looking into the killing of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's half-brother. The two women who attacked him could face the death penalty.